Hi, this is Brad with Copper Creek Cuts, a lawn care company in Northeast Florida. Today we've got a project with the Ventrac. We're going to be doing some digging work. This is a good buddy of mine's house. A few weeks ago, another friend of mine came in with his tractor, carved a lot of this out. We went ahead and spread some slag everywhere, and there's a little walk through here, which actually is pretty nice. It turned out the Ventrac was good for this little area because it was able to come carve through with the bucket, a little 48-inch wide path. Got rid of all these ferns, and you know, not like major excavation, just enough to put some fabric down. So we've got this nice little walkway, and this wasn't here at all before, and this was concrete. He was having a lot of drainage issues, so all the concrete got taken up and we spread all these slag. And he's installing a second culvert over here, so we can now have, you know, a two entrance driveway, so you can come in there and loop around. So one of the things we want to do today is fill this section in so we can drive. It's okay that it's humped because water runs off of this road, and so he's hoping that if there's a little bit of a berm where that culvert is, it'll stop some of the water. Smooth this dirt out, spread the rest of those millings over there. We're going to fill dirt in here. We're actually going to get the dirt from another part of the yard over here. So this was all stuff we spread with the Ventrac. This section here is where he parks his rum runners, what he calls it. I'll put some pictures in here of it. It's his pride and joy. The story, how he got it's actually pretty cool. If he's got a video on it, I'll have to link it to it. But he parks right here, and you know, when it rains, it gets real muddy. So we're gonna try and take dirt all from here, put it in that culvert, and then we'll spread out that slag here as well. We don't really know how deep we're gonna go here. Obviously, where it meets the concrete, we're going to need to go a little bit deeper so that slag doesn't, you know, roll out. But past that, we aren't really sure how much dirt we need and how much slag we have, so we're just going to play it by ear. And of course, to do the work, we've got the Ventrac 4520P with the bucket. Took the extension off. I'll probably use the extension when we're spreading that slag. I've found that if you aren't careful, some certain size rocks will get in behind here and pinch and grind and crack, and so that bucket extension, you really can't see as well what you're doing, but it does protect rocks from getting as much in here, which will be good. It also lets you carry a little more, so that'll work good when I'm just spreading the slag around. And in this video, I'll tell you everything I've learned about grading with the bucket, spreading material with the bucket, and the biggest downfall of using the Ventrac bucket for this kind of work is visibility. It is extremely difficult to tell when your bucket is level. So what you see me doing here, I'm scraping off the top layer of soil, and I kind of index the bucket off of the driveway, but that's really kind of a feel thing where I'm floating the bucket so that it drops down to touch the driveway. Then I have to manipulate the auxiliary SDLA lever to tilt the bucket forward and back until I feel like it's completely flat. Because from where I sit in the seat, I cannot exactly tell when it's completely flat based on the visibility that I have. That leads to some issues where I might think it's level, but it's not, and I'm not grading at the specific right angle I need to really maximize the effect I'm having in this work. The other issue is that the front end of this Ventrac will start to sag a little bit. That's because it's got tires. So as there's more weight in the bucket, I think you can see it happen here. As there's more weight in the bucket, the front end sags, which means I'm digging deeper than grade. And then that adds even more dirt, which makes it heavier, which makes me sink even lower beyond grade. So there's quite a few times where if I'm not paying super close attention and adjusting the height of the bucket as I go, I can dig some really deep trenches. And one of the issues with that, aside from the fact that it's not level anymore, is that now when those front wheels drive forward into that divot, it indexes the bucket to that low spot, which throws it completely off. So it's one of those things where if you mess up a little bit by creating a divot, at least for me, it's extremely difficult to reset and to get back to a perfect grade situation. So you've got to, as you're grading, be very, very mindful of the fact that that bucket is going to droop as you get more material in it, and you need to keep bringing it up and adjusting it. I will say, it is something you do get better with. I have had, I don't know, maybe a dozen hours of practice now over multiple different jobs where I've either been spreading material or grading, and it does get easier the more you do it. The visibility, it doesn't get better, but you learn how to read what the bucket is doing, where the bucket is with that limited visibility better. But if you're looking for perfect level grading, I don't think it's going to happen. The closest way to have it happen is to have a spotter. And so there'll be a couple of times where Nathan, my friend, will get in front, especially on this edge that I'm working on right next to the driveway where we want to get it perfect. He's actually spotting me and telling me, no, you need to tilt your bucket forward just a little bit to make it level. And as I'm driving forward, he'll say, hey, your bucket's drooping, you need to pull it up a little. That's really the best way to ensure that you're level grading. If you're just doing it from the seat, I haven't got good enough to where I would feel comfortable saying, yes, you can absolutely do it from the seat by yourself. Maybe you could with enough practice, but I am not there yet. So getting the feel for where the bucket is actually level, remembering that as you gather more material, you've got to adjust where your bucket is because the front of the machine will sag. Those are two of the biggest things that will help your grading job go better. Take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. I would still consider myself a beginner on this machine. But when it comes to grading, I think that a fair statement is that the Ventrac can do probably 80 to 90% of it, and you will have maybe 10 to 20% left over as handwork. I think those numbers will go down the better you get at the machine. I know when I first started, I was probably closer to that 80%. I think now I'm probably close to the 90%. As you get more comfortable with using the blade to back drag, that'll get you a little bit more efficient as well. But back dragging's tough too because that's another visibility issue that I haven't quite got over yet. I haven't been able to figure out by feel and the very limited visibility what's happening when I'm back dragging. It's kind of just a guessing more than I can actually see what I'm doing. This is all the dirt and sod that I removed. I've been putting it here in front of this culvert we talked about. The Ventrac is so light that it doesn't really compact that well, so Nathan actually just kept driving his truck back and forth over it, which I thought was actually pretty smart. But that did help pack things down a lot more than the Ventrac by itself. You can see some back dragging that I'm doing here on some of the bigger piles of dirt, but I do think you're going to have handwork for, you know, places like the edges of the culvert, for the real finesse stuff. And that might be true of any earth-moving equipment. I honestly don't know, but I know it is at my current experience level using the Ventrac bucket. Now, one thing I will mention is that while the Ventrac is not as easy to use as a skid steer, it doesn't have as good visibility as a skid steer. There is no way I would have been able to do this job with a skid steer and not completely destroyed his yard. Tracking back and forth a skid steer that weighed, 4, 5, 6,000 pounds, I would have had better visibility. It would have had better power for pushing through the dirt, but I guarantee you I would have left his yard a complete mess. The gravel in the driveway that I was driving over back and forth probably would have had to been touched up at the end of the day. So that's one big plus of this Ventrac machine, is that it's so light that I can track all day long over somebody's yard, even if it's damp and wet. I had a job the other day in my neighborhood where somebody got a load of dirt and they did a couple wheelbarrowfuls, and they live 2 streets over from me. So they came over and were like, hey, Brad, we had met when I was spreading a load of dirt in my yard with the Ventrac. He introduced himself to me and said, hey, I'm going to be spreading some dirt soon, and he got my info. And so all he wanted me to do was drop the dirt, and he would spread it out manually. So for about an hour and a half, that's what I did. I had a $150 an hour rate that he agreed to because I didn't have to load anything up. I just drove the Ventrac 1 street over. But again, using the machine to shuttle dirt, to shuttle mulch, rock, it's such a good machine for it because it doesn't damage the yard that you're on. So there were definitely tire impressions in that gentleman's lawn when I was done spreading the dirt in the low spots, but there weren't ruts and there wasn't anything that, you know, was damaged or had to be repaired. I could not have done that with a skid steer and had the same results. So there are absolutely drawbacks to using the Ventrac for this kind of work, but there are a ton of benefits as well. And like I said, if you've already got the Ventrac for some other line of business, maybe you're doing brush cutting with a tough cut, or maybe you're doing finish mowing with one of their 72-inch mowers or something, for fairly little investment, you can open up another line of business. And this is the instance where he was guiding me and doing the real specific work because I really couldn't see what the leading edge of that blade is doing. It's also pretty funny to me, if you get a tractor, that's kind of like the equivalent of being the friend in your circle that has a pickup truck, so everybody asks you to help move stuff. I've probably done more work for friends and family, spreading material, grading areas, because they know I've got this machine. The idea of spreading a whole truckload of slag by hand, by wheelbarrow, is just so mind-numbing, especially when you see how quick the Ventrac can do it. That bucket's capacity is nothing compared to a skid steer, but it's a quick little machine and it shuttles it back and forth extremely fast. And as we get into the second phase of the project, which is spreading these millings or slag, I'm not sure what the right word for it is. It's all the leftover stuff in the foundry when they melt metals together. It's actually a pretty neat byproduct of manufacturing. But anyways, one thing I will say that I wish was different on the Ventrac is using the SDLA lever, the auxiliary lever, to tilt that bucket. It's kind of a finesse move, but the Ventrac does not have electric over hydraulic controls, which means the levers that you're using are, activating spools and valves directly versus something like a skid steer where those joysticks are connected to electronics and the electronics are what are opening the valves. Basically, all that means in layman's terms is that it takes more physical effort to operate the hydraulic controls of the SDLA levers on the Ventrac than something like a skid steer. And in most cases, driving forward or backwards, raising the bucket up and down, it doesn't really matter. But the geometry of that secondary lever that you move left and right, it takes a significant amount of pressure to move it left and right and to tilt the bucket forward and back. So if you're trying to do finesse moves and gently let that bucket out as you back up, it's something that, at least in my experience, it does wear your arm out. After about 10 or 15 minutes, I'm feeling it in my shoulders. Maybe that's something I'm doing wrong, but on all the jobs where I've spread things, my arm is sore 10 minutes into it, and I've just lived with the fact that it's gonna be sore the rest of the time until the job's done. But again, not as sore as my back would be if I was shoveling all this stuff into a wheelbarrow and carrying it over by hands. So it's all a trade-off, but overall, I just can't recommend the bucket on the Ventrac enough. I would never say the bucket is reason enough to buy a Ventrac by itself. But what I will say is that if you already own a Ventrac and do not own a bucket, hands down, it is the best investment you will make. There are so many jobs that I never even thought about using the bucket for, that now that I have, I say, wait a second, I could use the Ventrac bucket for this thing and it would make it 10 times easier. That has happened over and over and over again, and I cannot compliment this product enough. The only other downside that I can think of as I'm watching this scene here is what I talked about at the beginning, that there are definitely certain sizes of material that will get caught between the bucket and the frame. There's a little bit of a gap, and when you drive into a pile and the pile spills over the sides of the machine, it can get stuck in there, and it doesn't interfere with the hydraulic cylinder or the hydraulic connections, but it can get caught in between the bucket and the frame, and really all it's doing is scratching the paint. I don't know necessarily that there would be terrible long-term effects, but a couple of times it has exploded the rock as it's being crushed. So that is definitely something that can scare you for sure, but also depending on how that rock breaks, I mean, maybe it could hit somebody in the eye if they're close by and don't have the proper eye protection on. But to me, that would be like a 1 in 1,000 thing. Certainly not something you would ever chance. This section here, I think, is a very good description of me trying to use the bucket as a skid steer to push a pile and to smooth it out. But because I can't get it perfectly level, I end up not being very successful at it. And then you can also see that when I create a divot or a valley or a hill, whatever you want to call it, because I have spread it imperfectly, because the bucket wasn't perfectly flat, it makes correcting it much more difficult, again, because the front tires will index off of that. Once the back tires hit it, they index off of it and change the way the bucket lays too. So that's probably, I don't know if frustration's the right word, but that's one of the bigger issues that I ran into because of my inexperience, coupled with the fact that I just can't see what the front edge of that blade is doing. I can't tell with 100% accuracy when it's level. And I know there's a lot of guys who are going to say, if you can't tell if a bucket is level all the time, you got no business grading with it or doing whatever with it. And I'm not going to argue that I do wish I could see that it was level, but to say you can't use it to do work is just silly. I mean, there's no way that I'm going to go rent a skid steer for this type of work. The time, the drive, the rental fee, the extra weight on these types of properties where it could be tearing up grass, it's just not worth it. So I'm definitely going to make do with the couple of quirks that come about with the Ventrac bucket. I will take the learning curve where I've got to pay real close attention. I'll take the sore arm from the controls for the tilt curl of the bucket, because it prevents me from having to invest $30,000-$40,000 in a skid steer or tie up $1,000 of rental and time and a dump trailer big enough to hold a skid steer that can do the work. Yeah, you find all kind of fun metal pieces in this slag. I think there were a few nails. Hopefully Nathan hasn't caught a flat tire as he's been using his new driveway. It's good if you can find stuff like this before you let your car drive over it. And those shots of working at the pile with the Ventrac hopefully will show you how quick it can go. Obviously that's going to depend on where you're shuttling it, but I think that should give you a good idea of what it's like to use the bucket for this type of project. So we're here a few months later at my buddy's house, and I wanted to show you what the project looked like. And again, the main issue was that before this was done, and when this was all concrete, limestone from this road, because it's higher, because of the way they graded it, it would always run down his property. He said it would go all the way back into his backyard. It would also cut across this yard downhill to the neighbors. And I guess that's just a side effect of the county using limestone as a base for this road. But it just, because you can see, hopefully you can see how much higher the road is in this property, and that concrete, it must have just funneled it all in. So that's one of the reasons why I switched to this permeable stuff. And you can see it turned out really nice. So now we've got the main drive. This is a little driveway and turnout. This is real good if you've got company. It increased us parking there. And see, this tamped down pretty nice and looks real good now. I don't know if we finished this in the video. I think he tackled the rest of this himself because we ran out of daylight. But you can see he's got a nice little crown on that, and it looks real good. But again, he said that it has completely solved the issue of the limestone, putting in this gravel. He's got this nice walkway up. There used to be an old concrete sidewalk that ran to the driveway that way. Those ferns will probably fill that all in over time. And now this whole piece used to be concrete. It's all gone. And when he used to park his truck there, his rum runner is what he calls it, when he used to park that there, it would always be in mud because it was all grass. But now all this is gravel. He's got a little side by side you can see there. But he said this works out real well, and it's a lot more user-friendly for him parking there and getting out, and if he's got to do any work on the truck, it's nice to not have to do it in mud. So there you go. Can you install a driveway with a Ventrac? Absolutely. I don't know if it's the easiest way, but if you've already got the Ventrac for mowing, for tough cut, you know, for those buckets I think are like 2,000 bucks, which I'm not saying $2,000 is nothing, but compared to what you've already invested in a Ventrac, if you just buy another $2,000 bucket, you can do so much work. Now this is just for my buddy, and he tried to pay me, but I don't want him thinking I'm doing something because he's paying me. He's my friend and I love him, and that's why I want to do something for him. But there's a ton of work that you can do with a Ventrac and a bucket. And if you do get a bucket, I would strongly recommend the extension and the teeth that go with it. They probably add $300 for each one, $300. I don't know what the prices are, but they also let you do much more with the bucket. So not only does the bucket let you do a lot more work with the Ventrac, but the teeth and the extension lets you do a lot more bucket work with the bucket. So if you've got any questions about the Ventrac, about dirt work, about anything I talked about, feel free to drop a comment. Honestly, the best way to get a hold of me though, and make sure I see it, is to shoot me an email. As always, thanks so much for watching. I really do appreciate it.